4 straight days of violent protests in Egypt are rattling investors' nerves across the globe. We want to get you the very latest now on the ground in Cairo with CNBC's Yousef Gamal. He joins us now on the phone. Yousef.
Well, the situation continues to deteriorate, to say the least. Low visibility across the city, lots of black smoke coming from various fires across town. There are helicopters hovering above now. We've seen very aggressive confrontations between rioters and anti-rioter police. Airlines have made several announcements, including Kuwait Airlines has suspended flights to Egypt. Egypt Air has suspended flights for the next 12 hours coming out of Egypt. The army has moved into the city and continues to use tear gas and black smoke. I've had to make personal experience with tear gas. Let me tell you, it was not a pleasant one. Cars have been set on fire here around the hotel and in the heart of Cairo. Other cities are affected as well, Alexandria and Suez. The White House is expected to make a press briefing. We're still awaiting more news on that. The U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made a few comments as well. U.S. President Barack Obama weighed into the conversation. Remember, Egypt is a very important geopolitical power and, of course, an important ally in the region against the war on terror and it's supporting peace and democracy in the Middle East. Now, what are they protesting about? Of course, rising prices, youth unemployment, corruption, several different issues. Remember, this is the most populous Arab country. Let me run you through some numbers now. If you remember the events in Tunisia, there was the fear of a political contagion spreading, and we saw the market react to that last week, losing some 6% in anticipation of possible turmoil in Egypt. Of course, when the market opened on Tuesday after national holiday, it dropped some 5%. Then yesterday, down another 10%. They suspended trading for about 45 minutes. The index lost $12 billion in just 2 sessions. The Egyptian pound at a 6-year low against the dollar. We'll have to see how all this plays out. At the moment, the situation very tense on the street and a stock market reaction that is probably going to be extremely negative, to say the least, if it opens at all on Sunday.
All right, Yousef, stay safe. Thank you so much for that report. And Yousef mentioned that press briefing at the White House. We are monitoring that. It has been delayed. But when they speak about Egypt or this situation in the Middle East, we're going to bring that to you live. In the meantime, what do traders make of this situation? Joining us right now via telepresence is John Kilduff, founding partner of Again Capital. Also joining us is Jim Iuorio, TJM Institutional Services Director. And we have Dave Rovelli, Managing Director at Canaccord Genuity, and our very own Sharon Epperson. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Jim Iuorio, let me start with you. It's a sea of red in the market today. Is this a reaction to Egypt? Is it about GDP? Is it just a breather? What's going on?
Well, it's certainly a reaction to Egypt. But remember, when a market's kind of due for a correction like this, and it's been in an overbought condition, sometimes something that might not have as big effect at other times has a bigger effect. And that's what we're seeing right now. Not that the situation in Egypt isn't a big deal in its entirety, because it is. But when we look at it, we have to ask ourselves why it's happening and where could it spread to. They talked about higher food prices. So you have to in your head make the connection that QE from coming out of this country over the last couple of years has spiked commodity prices throughout the world. And, we don't mind spiking it to China a little bit because that gives us a negotiating chip with currency valuations. But the collateral damages all the other emerging markets. So that's why we see the emerging markets getting. The first thing I did when I saw this news coming out of Suez is I bought gold and sold my position in the EEM, the emerging markets thing, because we're reminded every once in a while that gold is a decent place to have some money. And then when you look at what the safety stores are, you can make an argument against most of them, including the U.S. dollar and the euro.
Dave, you heard the way Jim played it. Did you play it the same way, or are you doing something different?
Well, I would definitely own some gold, definitely own some oil, maybe take a look at his Suncor up in Canada. It's getting a nice bump today. But I also want to say that I think it has a lot to do with Egypt, but I also feel it has a lot to do with Amazon and Microsoft's earnings. On top of that, just look at Amazon. It's down huge. The Nasdaq's down 3.5% in the last week, basically most of it today. And I have a feeling it's just a natural correction in the market. And when you throw the Egypt thing into it, the mix, the market's probably a little oversold today, but I think what people said, like Jimmy said, is they're worried about the contagion. Is this going to spread to the other Middle Eastern countries? And then it could get a lot worse.
Does the Nasdaq go lower from here, do you think?
Excuse me?
Does the Nasdaq go lower from here, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I don't see anybody stepping in and buying stocks today. Yeah. Why would you? It's a Friday. There's a lot of bad news. They want to see how Egypt's going to play out over the weekend. So why would you step in and buy? I think the S&P will probably settle in around 1270 today. I think you might see some more selling into the close.
John, tell me about the oil situation, how it's being impacted here, the divergence we're seeing between Brent and WTI, and does that get exacerbated here?
No, in fact, it's been closing, Melissa, and I think it's because WTI looks like a relative value, especially in these conditions, relative to Brent. We jumped, the oil market jumped all over this. It had a slight reaction to it Tuesday night after the American Petroleum Institute issued a bearish report on inventories. We rallied significantly as details emerged about Egypt here. The reason it's so important for this market is that if Egypt falls into hands that are anti-Western, anti-U.S., anti-Israel, the calculus of the region changes big time because Hezbollah just took Lebanon, Iranian-backed proxy there. It's going to bring up the entire temperature of the entire region. That's the issue.
Sharon, we started out the situation in Egypt saying that it wasn't going to have that big of an impact on crude oil because they don't produce that much oil. Now it is having a big impact. What has changed and will it continue?
It's the geopolitical risk that traders are concerned about, not the supply risk. We've outlined that the supply risk is not that great, and we're just getting the latest reports on the Suez Canal. It is operating normally. Everything is set to go as planned for the Saturday shipments through the Suez Canal as well. So that is not the real issue. The issue is the contagion and whether this will spread and cause unrest and discord across the Middle East, and particularly in Saudi Arabia and in those countries. That is what the real concern is here. And you can tell that it's not as much of a fundamental supply story when you look at the divergence in price between WTI and Brent in terms of the surge that we've seen today in the price action. We've seen a much greater percentage move in the light sweet crude oil here in the U.S. than we have had in the Brent crude price, and Brent crude would be more affected by a supply disruption. But the fact remains that we're looking at oil prices, and one oil price in particular, that Brent crude price, very close to $100 a barrel. And when we hit that $100 a barrel mark, regardless of what contract it's in, that is going to cause the bullish momentum that's already in this market to continue and look for WTI to follow.
Jim Iuorio, what do you do for the rest of the day? How do you set yourself up for Monday?
Well, I'm looking at getting a little bit more short the stock market because, as we said before, the stock market is due for a pullback. We've been talking about it for weeks. Sometimes a fundamental reason like global unrest is what begins it. So I'm going to look to probably buy volatility and be short the market. I'm looking at also increasing possibly gold and silver. Gold has been in a correction for 3 weeks, and it seems like the bottom dropped out of gold, but it's only down 8.5% total on the move. So it's not that huge of a correction. Sometimes when a market's rallied so long, a correction tends to look like a bear market. I don't believe it was a bear market in gold. I think this is probably a buying opportunity.
All right. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. John, Jim, Dave, and Sharon, we appreciate it. There are several stocks moving to the upside on the Egypt crisis. CNBC's Brian Shactman takes a look. Brian.
Well, it's very interesting in light of what Sharon said, because even if the Suez is open now, there's a lot of investors out there taking a bet that it might not stay open. I'm going to focus on shipping. The Suez Canal, as we've talked about, connects the Mediterranean with the Red Sea. It's one of the world's busiest shipping channels, as we know. If you shut it down, as we've discussed, some important stuff needs to find another, more expensive route, most likely around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. That would add 6,000 miles to a trip, and because of that, shipping costs are going to rise, giving some companies some major pricing power. Take a look at these names and these moves. Frontline, TK, Overseas Shipholding, and Nordic American up incredible amounts here. We're talking 7%, almost 5%, almost 6%, and 2.25%. There's a common thread here, not just that they're shipping, they ship crude oil. That's the fear. A disruption with the canal will really drive up the premiums for one, to make sure crude gets to where it's supposed to be, and will also take more ships to make that trip. I also want to take a look at some dry bulk names, because this is not a broad-based shipping rally here. Dry bulk names are not following suit, and the reason is basically that there's less of fear about these products. Even 40% of what goes through the Suez is containers and finished products, but no one seems concerned about that today. These names are to the downside. Now, let's clarify this again, because the pattern is clear with what I just pointed out. There's other elements involved here. Short covering is definitely one impact here. These are stocks that have been down a lot in the last year, and that is a furious component of this rally. And also, I want to point out, we don't even know if it'll be closed, so how long this issue will last is a major issue. And I want to reflect on what Sharon said also. Dennis Gartman said on CNBC earlier today that he believes that this issue is not so much about the Suez he doesn't think it's going to close. It's about the contagion of the unrest. And if that goes into the Persian Gulf, then we have another whole different set of problems. And that would actually still boost these tanker names because it would have to do with crude. Back to you, Melissa.
All right, Brian Shactman, thanks so much for that report. And the White House says they are not taking sides, but for how long? CNBC's chief Washington correspondent John Harwood has more.
Well, Melissa, as we heard earlier from Yousef's report, we are waiting for a White House briefing from Press Secretary Robert Gibbs. Perhaps other administration officials will join him to react. The administration is being forced to recalibrate its position on Egypt in light of these protests. President Obama has regarded President Mubarak as a staunch ally of the United States and has not leaned into the desire for change and protest as heavily as some would have liked him to have done. Now, we did see earlier today Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, sharply criticizing the nature of the crackdown and indicating a shift in the administration's position. Take a listen.
We urge the Egyptian authorities to allow peaceful protests and to reverse the unprecedented steps it has taken to cut off communications. As a partner, we strongly believe that the Egyptian government needs to engage immediately with the Egyptian people in implementing needed economic, political, and social reforms.
Now, obviously, this is a very, very difficult call for the administration. It may be why Press Secretary Gibbs has delayed this briefing. We'll see whether there are further adjustments to the administration's position, but it is not clear that there is still time for President Mubarak in Egypt to catch up to the protests and react in the way that Secretary Clinton was urging.
All right, interesting stuff. John Harwood, thanks so much.